Have you ever stood before a woman crying and felt everything inside you collapse? You were right. You knew you were right. You spoke calmly. You acted respectfully, but all it took was one tear sliding down her face for something inside you to waver, as if suddenly the facts vanished and the emotion had taken control of the room. Seneca said, "The man who surrenders to the impulse of the moment becomes a slave to the next." And that's exactly what happens when tears enter the room as a strategy. You bow to emotion and lose reason. You forget what actually happened to try and fix what she seems to feel. But here's the blind spot few men see. Feminine tears, when used subtly, are not fragility. They are direction. She doesn't shout. She softens her voice. She doesn't demand. She goes quiet. She doesn't argue. She cries. And in that seemingly fragile gesture, she alters your behavior without even touching you. We're not talking about real, sincere, vulnerable crying. We're talking about the tear that appears at the exact moment, not loaded with pain, but with command. She doesn't say, "Obey me." She makes you feel guilty for not having obeyed. And for a man with a sense of justice, that's brutal, because he wants to be firm, but also fair. And when he confuses emotion with truth, he gives in, he folds, he backs down. The pain here is not in the crying. It's in the emptiness that follows, in the internal silence of someone who no longer knows if he's right or wrong, someone who begins to doubt his own perception, someone who feels small even after trying to do everything the right way. You've been there. The tight throat, the racing mind, the heart torn between standing your ground or protecting the one who's crying. But maybe no one ever told you this clearly. You are not cruel for holding your ground in the face of a tear. You are not insensitive for wanting to understand before you give in. You are not less of a man for saying no, even when her eyes beg yes. This video is not about discrediting female emotion. It's about not surrendering to every emotion that comes loaded with hidden command. It's about not being swayed by gestures that pull focus from what really matters. It's about learning to feel and still choose with presence, not with submission. Tears used as manipulation are a silent art, and you're only defeated by them if you give away your power to choose. So breathe, go back inside, and remember, you are not here to react to the world. You are here to sustain who you chose to be, even when everything around you begs you to bow. You were speaking calmly, trying to express your point of view clearly and coherently when you heard the sob. First, a slight tremble in her voice, then quickened breathing, and finally, a tear slowly sliding down her cheek, gleaming. In an instant, that objective fact dissolved, and you found yourself no longer discussing logic, but the emotion she expressed. Little by little, your confidence cracked. Your voice lost firmness because you felt a weight in your chest, the weight of guilt. Your mind raced. Did I go too far? Was I too harsh? Did I miss her pain? And even knowing every detail, even certain of every word, you began to fold under the weight of doubt. The power of that first tear is in shifting the discussion from what happened to what is felt. It doesn't accuse, it doesn't demand, it doesn't point fingers. It simply appears, a fragile, almost unconscious act, and makes you stop, makes you question your own judgment. The tear in that moment stops being an expression of sadness and becomes a silent command. Do something. Fix it, give in, and you, a man of principle and firm will, feel the invisible hand demanding your surrender. Your posture falters, your heartbeat stumbles, reason screams, but the body bows. You catch yourself looking down, seeking permission in your own reactions to stay firm. And in that inner silence, that screaming void, the most painful confusion is born. The feeling that if you don't yield, you'll lose not just the argument, but the person you valued. But know this with clarity. Doubting yourself in the face of strategic tears is not weakness, it's confusion. It's the powerful effect of a gesture loaded with emotional impulse, and that discomfort won't go away until you restore your presence, until you decide again that your voice has value, even when she's crying, until you remember that firmness is not born from a lack of emotion, but from self-control in the face of it. So breathe deep, feel the weight of just indignation, and return to your center. Because only those who hold steady can respond, not react, to any tear trying to take the helm. A man is conditioned from the beginning to protect, to care, to offer safety in the face of vulnerability. That's not weakness, it's biology, ancestral heritage. And that's exactly why a woman's crying holds such silent and, at the same time, such effective power. Neuroscience shows this clearly. A woman's tears activate in the male brain areas associated with empathy, guilt, and urgency to act. In other words, when she cries, your instinct is triggered, not by logic, but by emotional impulse. Your body interprets that tear as a signal of emotional danger, and you react with the intent to fix the moment, even when there's nothing to fix, even when rationally you know you've done nothing wrong. Evolutionary psychology explains this phenomenon as well. Throughout history, women developed emotional strategies to secure support, closeness, and safety. Crying, when used strategically, even if unconsciously, becomes a tool of guidance. Not of dialogue, but of direction. She doesn't want to discuss. She wants you to change your mind. She doesn't want to understand what you think. She wants you to feel what she wants. And in that moment, it's not the truth that matters. It's the effect. That's why even in simple disagreements, when she suddenly gets emotional, you lose your ground. Because your body reacts as if it's facing real pain, and maybe it is. But the problem isn't the tear itself. It's what it starts to command in you. The man who doesn't understand this trigger becomes a hostage to it. He moves out of pity, decides out of guilt, yields out of discomfort. And that, to the woman, becomes a learned language. She notices, even without malicious intent, that you change when she cries. And that pattern becomes habit. She cries, you disarm. She gets emotional, you abandon logic. She dramatizes, you surrender. It's not always conscious, but it works. And as long as you don't know where you're being hit, you'll keep handing over your leadership to the impulse of the moment. That's why you must see. Tears have power, but they only dominate the distracted. When you understand the mechanics behind the emotion, you stop moving on instinct and begin responding with awareness. Since childhood, you were taught that crying equals truth. Someone cried, they're feeling something, they must be right. But the emotional world doesn't work like that. Emotion can be genuine in the body and still serve a hidden intention. Yes, she may be crying, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong, that you're the guilty one, or that you must give in. Emotion is not an argument, it's an expression, and expression, no matter how intense it may seem, does not cancel out the need for reason. Not every tear is false, but not every tear is pure. Some emotions arise as expression, and some are triggered as reaction, and the difference between the two lies in your ability to see beyond what's in front of you. Emotional manipulation is rarely theatrical. It has no obvious script. It's a subtle art, refined, intelligent. It's a gaze that drops at just the right moment, a voice that breaks at the perfect time, a long pause, right when you were about to affirm yourself. It's all very soft, and because of that, so dangerous. If you've been conditioned to believe that every emotion is truth, you'll be led by every tear. You'll be bent by every expression. You'll be manipulated by every display of fragility, because your decisions won't be driven by what is, but by what appears to be. And what breaks this cycle is not coldness, not harshness, it's clarity. It's feeling and still thinking. It's looking at the scene with compassion, but also with structure. It's understanding that the emotion may be real, but the intention behind it isn't always clean. The tear is a resource, not a verdict. And the man who understands this stops apologizing for being firm, stops retreating in the face of feelings, and starts sustaining his truth, even when the tears try to silence his voice. Because the one who doesn't know where manipulation lies mistakes cowardice for sensitivity, but the one who sees it responds with presence, not with submission. Every time you react to tears as if they were an absolute truth, you give away the control. not just of the conversation, but of the relationship itself. You change your tone, you abandon your point, you interrupt your reasoning, all because she cried. And without realizing it, you communicate one clear message: just get emotional and I'll back off. And that creates a pattern. She senses, even without bad intentions, that she holds a key in her hands. The key of guilt, the key of emotional urgency, the key that makes you betray what you believe to protect what she feels. And the worst part, you start to lose something even deeper: her respect. Because the man who yields every time he's emotionally pressured may seem sensitive, but behind the affection, she sees insecurity. She sees that what moves you isn't clarity, it's fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being the villain, fear of being abandoned, and fear, when it rules your choices, weakens your presence. You enter a cycle. She cries, you retreat. She gets emotional, you change your mind. She goes silent, you explain yourself. And slowly your word loses weight. Your no becomes fragile. Your direction loses force, and the relationship turns into a field of emotional insecurity, not mutual growth. But there's a way out. Simple, practical, solid. Breathe. Feel the impact of the emotion, but don't respond immediately. Hold the impulse. Sustain your gaze and ask with firmness and softness, what is it that you truly want right now? That question changes the game, because it cuts through the emotional fog and brings focus back to intention. It disarms the unconscious performance. It removes the tear from the throne and returns the conversation to dialogue, not emotional command. Don't run from emotion, but don't be led by it either. Observe, breathe, choose. That is the posture of a man who doesn't bow, but also doesn't harden. He feels, but doesn't surrender to every feeling that tries to guide him without permission. And that kind of posture she respects, even if, at first, she tries to test it. You can recognize a man who has been broken by a woman's tears just by observing his body, the chest drawn in, shoulders caved, the gaze searching for approval, the voice overly cautious, almost apologizing for existing. He doesn't stand by what he feels. He's constantly trying to correct himself, trying to please, to soften, to compensate, because he feels that in the presence of her tears, he's lost the right to stay firm. That's the body of someone conditioned to avoid confrontation. Someone who learned that to be good, he must be malleable. But kindness without structure turns into weakness, and sensitivity without boundaries becomes submission. The composed, centered, whole man carries a different energy. He doesn't harden, but he doesn't dissolve either. He breathes when tension arises. He observes the moment without rushing. He feels her emotion, but doesn't carry it on his shoulders. His body language communicates what his mouth doesn't need to explain. His body remains open. His chin doesn't drop. His gaze is firm, direct, calm. His silence isn't fear, it's presence. It's the pause of someone who is not here to argue or please, but to sustain what he believes. That man's mind doesn't race to predict her next reaction. It watches, it listens, it filters, and then it responds, not with coldness, but with clarity. When she cries, he doesn't abandon his center. He doesn't shrink as if facing an emotional authority. He remains, with tenderness in his eyes, but firmness in his position. And he transmits, with the calm of someone who knows himself, I see your emotion, but I will not abandon my structure. And that kind of presence is what deep down every woman is testing to find. Not the man who reacts, but the man who sustains, who is not cruel, but clear, who doesn't feel impulsively, but feels intelligently, who loves without erasing himself. And that's exactly why she begins to respect him. Seneca said, reason must be your sword, emotion your shield, never the other way around. But many men have reversed that. They've traded clarity for guilt, their center for doubt, the truth they feel for the tears they see. Tears can move, they can touch, they can be sincere, but if they're used as instruments of emotional command, they stop being expression and become manipulation. And if you don't know how to remain in your own center, you begin to live based on her reactions. Every decision you make passes through the filter of fear. Fear of seeming harsh, fear of being misunderstood, fear of causing pain. But the man who lives in fear of being misjudged ends up being mistreated, because the one who always backs down when others get emotional will never be seen as a pillar. He'll be seen as someone who can be moved with a tear, a silence, a look. And respect is not born from blind compassion. It's born from the silent clarity of someone who feels but doesn't bow, who cares but doesn't surrender, who is present but doesn't sell himself for approval. Being a man is not about denying emotion, it's about recognizing it without letting it decide for you. It's about listening to what comes from the other without abandoning yourself in the process. It's about looking into the eyes of someone crying and calmly saying, "I understand what you feel, but I know who I am." That's the kind of presence you can't learn in books. That's the kind of firmness that doesn't need to shout. It's built in every moment where you choose to remain whole, even when everything around you tries to melt you through affection. Finish with this. She may cry, but if what she wants is to manipulate, a firm silence is worth more than 1,000 apologies. Being a man is not about hardening. It's about being solid, even when the world tries to liquefy you with love. Because the man who sustains his truth is the only one who never bends to emotion disguised as love.